You're in danger. Pretend I'm your dad.
The Vampire King whispered. What happened next? No one was prepared for. In the hush of a night that felt too still for any ordinary hour, the old house breathed around me like a living thing. Its wooden beams whispered as though settling into secrets they had held for decades, and I found myself awake far earlier than dawn should have dared to come. The moon had slipped across the floorboards in long pale strokes, and I was standing in the hallway without remembering how I had risen from bed. Perhaps it was the dream I couldn't recall. Perhaps it was the uneasy feeling that someone had spoken my name from far beyond the walls. Whatever the reason, I found myself staring toward the front door when the knock came, a sharp, urgent sound that seemed to split the stillness in two. I froze. No one visited this late. No one should even know I was back in this house after all the years I had avoided it. My breath caught in my throat and a tremor ran down my spine as though someone had drawn a cold finger across it. The knock came again, softer this time, but more insistent, threaded with the kind of plea I didn't know how to name. My bare feet edged forward before reason could stop them. I should have called someone. I should have turned away. But something pulled me, something old and half-buried. When I cracked open the door, moonlight spilled over the stranger's face, carving it into sharp and haunting lines. He was tall, impossibly tall, with eyes too dark to reflect the night. He leaned forward, his breath brushing my cheek like winter wind, and whispered, "Pretend I'm your dad." The words punched the air from my lungs. A quiet gasp escaped me, and the world seemed to tilt, as if my childhood had risen from the floorboards to meet me. My father's absence, the long stretch of years without answers, the ache I packed away, all of it flared like fresh pain. Yet beneath the fear twisting through my chest, something else flickered. Curiosity, recognition that made no sense. An instinct I didn't trust. I tried to speak, but no sound formed. He stepped past me with a slow, assured grace, as though he knew the geography of this home better than I did. The door clicked shut behind him with a finality that made my heart beat harder. Every instinct screamed that I should run, yet something about his presence held me rooted. As though I were standing in the tide of a memory I had forgotten to keep, the house seemed to awaken differently with him inside it. Shadows shifted. The faint scent of cedar rose from the wooden beams. The stranger glanced around, touching nothing yet seeing everything, and gave me a look so gentle it disarmed my fear. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. "I'm here to protect you. That's all. But protection from what?" And why did he speak with such quiet authority, as if the question answered itself? We moved deeper into the house as though pulled by shared gravity. The familiar rooms felt foreign, their corners holding. Echoes of the past photographs of my family layered in dust, the worn chair where my mother used to read, and the lingering scent of cinnamon from holidays long ago. I felt myself drifting through these memories with an ache that softened the edges of my earlier terror. I put on the kettle out of instinct, hands shaking faintly, thinking that offering tea to a stranger who claimed protection made no sense. Still, he waited with a patience that felt deliberate, as though every small action I took held meaning. The steam curled around us in the kitchen. He watched the rising vapors the way one might regard something sacred. When I finally handed him a cup, our fingers didn't touch, but the closeness stirred a strange comfort. "You shouldn't know any of this," I said quietly. "This house. My parents, the way things used to be." He gave a small, almost bittersweet smile. "I know more than you think. Not because I should, but because I promised." The words tugged at something deep within me. As we walked through the hallway, I noticed the locked drawer in my father's old desk, its handle cold and humming faintly under my touch, as though alive with secrets. The stranger watched me reach for it, his expression unreadable. "There are answers," he murmured, "but they come with weight." My pulse drummed as I forced the drawer open. Inside lay a single brittle letter, edges yellowed with age. It trembled in my hands as though it had waited too long to be touched. My father's handwriting sprawled across the page, looping with the urgency of a man who knew time was running thin. The letter spoke of choices made in the shadows of our family history, choices that cracked what I thought I understood. A name I didn't recognize, a date that preceded my birth, a promise that had been broken long before I knew how to read. I felt the stranger's gaze on me as I read, his presence steady and somber. "You were there," I whispered suddenly, with a clarity that frightened me. "You remember this." His eyes darkened, soft with an old sorrow. "I do," he said. More than you can imagine, the world felt unsteady again. I moved to the kitchen, needing the mundane comfort of warmth and routine. As the morning light seeped through the curtains, we found ourselves seated across from each other with fresh cups of coffee between us. The confessions that followed tumbled out awkwardly, stuttering like forgotten lullabies. He spoke of time the way one might speak of stories passed down through generations measured, poetic, hinting at centuries without claiming them outright. He described my mother with a tenderness that unsettled and soothed me all at once. She wasn't afraid of me, he murmured. Not the way others were. The revelation cracked something open inside me. In the folds of an old photo album, I found a picture tucked behind a sleeve, my mother smiling toward the camera, and behind her, the stranger stood with one hand on her shoulder, a presence I had never noticed before. He looked unchanged. Exactly the same as he was now. I couldn't breathe for a moment. The world pressed in too tight. Twilight crept through the windows hours later as I stepped outside with him trailing behind me. Names drifted across the yard as neighbors whispered. Friends I hadn't seen since childhood emerged with pieces of the past I had never been given. Each story contradicted the last, a mosaic of truths and grievances. And then his words cut through the clamor. I loved them all in my way. The whispers turned to accusations. Grief rose in their faces, tangled with fear and resentment. But I refused to be a passive vessel for other people's histories. Tell me the truth, I demanded. All of it, no more riddles. Later. That night, after the crowd had dispersed, I found a recording tucked inside the same old drawer. The tape quivered between my fingers as I slid it into the dusty player. A shaky conversation crackled through the speakers. My father's voice and the stranger's, their words fragmented but overflowing with regret. Keep her safe, my father pleaded. Even if you must become something else. The stranger stood beside me, silent as snowfall as his own past unfurled in the tape's wavering hum. The confession I confronted him with afterward was darker and gentler than I expected. Under the vast midnight sky, he spoke of a life stretched too long, of devotion that had bent into something uncanny. No monsters lurked in his story only. Loneliness, sacrifice, and the ache of watching everyone fade while he remained. I won't let fear decide for me, I told him, voice trembling yet firm. He lowered his head, offering a choice. Accept the protection he had vowed to honor, with all its strange costs, or walk away and risk the shadows that had followed my family for generations. The hand he placed on my shoulder was light, tentative, as though afraid it would burn. But it didn't. For the first time since opening the door, I felt a spark of healing flicker through the fractured lines of my past. The days that followed unfolded slowly, stitched together with quiet rituals, mending an old sweater in the sunroom, sharing dinners where conversation came in gentle waves, watching old films until laughter returned in fragile bursts. The community that had once seemed fractured began to mend itself, one apology at a time. Some were accepted quickly. Some took longer, settling into place like puzzle pieces long misplaced. He stayed at the edges of these moments, careful not to intrude, honoring the boundaries I began to set. And I learned to hold my anger and love together, to let them coexist without consuming each other. Forgiveness came softly, on my own terms, but it came nonetheless. On a quiet evening warmed by lamplight, we shared a rare moment of unguarded laughter, almost startled by its own existence. The house felt lighter, as if it had finally exhaled. Then came the dawn. A gentle morning unfurled across the sky as I stepped outside, bare feet sinking into dew-kissed grass. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the weight of my family's legacy. The stranger stood nearby, not looming as he had that first night, but softened by a peace I hadn't seen in him before. It's time for me to go, he said, voice low but warm. Not because I'm banished. Because you don't need me to stand in the doorway anymore. Before he left, he pressed a small token into my palm, a charm my mother used to wear, shaped like a crescent moon. She wanted you to have it when you were ready, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. A breath of emotion caught in my chest. Will I see you again? He gave a quiet laugh, almost human in its softness. I'll be near, keeping the promise I made. But from a distance this time. And with that, he faded into the waking light. I turned back toward the house where my remaining family was gathering for breakfast, their murmurs warm and familiar. The world felt steady, finally. Not perfect, but honest as the sun lifted higher. I held the charm tightly. ready to step forward into a life shaped not by fear or mystery, but by the fragile, luminous hope I had learned to nurture in the company of a stranger who had once whispered, "Pretend I'm your dad," and in doing so, helped me reclaim the truths buried within my own heart. Even after he vanished into the soft shimmer of early light, I lingered outside, letting the air settle around me. The morning was quiet in a way that felt earned, as though the world itself had paused to acknowledge the shift that had taken place. I held the charm up toward the rising sun, watching the silver catch the gold. The crescent shape flickered like an echo of a lullaby I could almost remember. Something inside me unwound, like a knot loosening after years of being pulled too tight. I closed my fingers around it and pressed it to my heart, letting its familiar weight anchor me in the present moment, rather than the grief of the years that had come before. Walking back toward the house, I noticed small details I had overlooked for so long. The chipped paint around the windows that my mother used to retouch every summer. The rosebush by the porch that bloomed stubbornly each year regardless of neglect. The wind chimes that still hung crooked from their last storm, but continued to sing whenever the breeze coaxed them. These were fragments of a life I had been running from, and now they felt like pieces I was finally ready to gather. Inside, the warmth of breakfast greeted me. The clatter of dishes was rhythmic and comforting, a far cry from the tension that had hovered over the house for so long. My aunt was frying eggs, humming softly to herself the same tune she used to sing to me when I was a child. My cousin sat at the table scrolling through her phone, glancing up to offer a sleepy smile. It was ordinary, almost mundanely so, but it settled something deep inside me in a way I hadn't expected. I poured myself a cup of coffee, inhaling the rich scent that mingled with the morning sun. As I sat down, my aunt paused her humming, studying me with that gentle concern she'd always carried. "Rough night?" she asked softly, though her tone suggested she already knew more than she said. There was no fear in her eyes now, no hesitation. Whatever had weighed on the family, whatever had lingered in unspoken shadows, seemed to have loosened. "A long one," I admitted, curling my fingers around the mug for comfort. "But different. In a good way." The words surprised me even as they left my mouth. I expected to feel hollow or shaken after everything that had happened, but instead I felt grounded, as though finding out the truth had finally given shape to the years of uncertainty that had haunted me. My aunt nodded slowly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Your mother believed in many things," she said, "more than most people could understand. She used to say that love wasn't always meant to stay in one lifetime. Sometimes it stretched across more, touching us in ways we wouldn't see until we were ready." Her words felt like a whisper from the past, another thread weaving itself into the tapestry of truths I'd uncovered. I thought of the stranger, of his steady presence, his impossible stillness, the way he had spoken of my mother with such reverence. He wasn't a replacement for my father, wasn't meant to fill the void left by his absence. He was something else entirely, a guardian shaped by a promise forged in the darkest corners of devotion. A promise that had cost him more than I could fathom. As breakfast unfolded, the conversation drifted to memories, the good kind, the ones tinged with laughter rather than sorrow. My cousin recalled the summer afternoons when we played hide-and-seek through the fields. My aunt described how my mother used to dance in the kitchen when her favorite songs came on. These stories wrapped around me like a quilt stitched from moments I had forgotten but desperately needed to remember. Throughout the day, the house seemed to breathe easier. The lingering heaviness that had draped itself over the rooms felt lifted, as though the very walls had released their old secrets. I went through the attic, sorting through boxes I had long avoided. Dust coated my fingers, but each object I uncovered felt like a piece of myself being returned. Old journals, faded photographs, trinkets from trips my parents had taken before I was born. Each item carried stories I wasn't afraid to hold anymore. Later, I walked into the backyard where the sun had begun its slow descent. The sky stretched out in soft hues of pink and lavender. The quiet there felt peaceful rather than eerie. I sat in the grass, letting the cool blades tickle my legs, and thought of the stranger again. His presence had been unsettling, frightening even, but it had also been a catalyst. Without him, I might have never discovered the truth about my father's choices, my mother's strength, or the depth of care that had shaped their lives in ways I was only beginning to understand. I wondered where he was now, whether he watched from the shadows as he had promised, whether he felt the same bittersweet quiet that settled over me. The charm warmed in my palm again, and I closed my eyes, imagining the echo of his voice, steady, gentle, threaded with centuries of memory. It didn't frighten me anymore. Instead, it felt like the echo of a protective presence, distant but real. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of jasmine from the garden. I breathed in deeply, letting the comfort of the moment sink into my bones. Healing didn't arrive all at once. It came in quiet increments, in the steady bloom of trust and acceptance. And though the stranger wasn't here now, the journey he had set in motion continued to unfold within me. I rose to my feet as twilight deepened, feeling stronger than I had in years. The house glowed behind me with warm light, a beacon calling me back inside. But before I returned, I whispered a soft thank you into the dusk, an offering to the one who had kept a promise across lifetimes, who had stepped into the doorway of my fear and guided me toward a truth I had long been denied. The night settled gently as I walked back inside, and for the first time I felt ready not just to face the world, but to step fully into the life waiting for me beyond the shadows of the past and the days that followed. I returned to the porch at dusk, watching the horizon with a calm I hadn't felt in years. He never appeared, yet the quiet no longer carried fear. The charm at my collarbone became a steady reminder of everything I'd uncovered, truths about my family, about devotion that reached beyond a single lifetime, and about my own ability to stand firm in the face of uncertainty. Sometimes when the wind rustled through the trees, I imagined it carried a faint echo meant only for me, a reassurance that I was not as alone as I once believed. And with each passing evening, I stepped a little more confidently into the future, waiting just beyond the threshold. Hope,